Good evening. Welcome in Rijksmuseum Boerhaave. My name is Bart Grop. I'm a curator here in the museum, and tonight I will be your host. And it's so magnificent, and I'm so happy to have you here, finally living souls in front of the camera. People at home, welcome to this lecture. And tonight we have a very interesting speaker for you, Professor Jan-Bas Prins. He will introduce himself, he told me just a few seconds ago. But I have to tell you that he is a member of the Netherlands National Committee for the Protection of Animals Used for Scientific Purposes. It's a mouthful, but he will explain why this is a mouthful, probably. And in 2018, right? The Dutch government started with a national program, transition to animal-free innovations, and that met reactions from foreign countries because they thought, have the Dutch gone mad?
Definitely.
And I would like to hear from Jan-Bas Prins. Did we? The floor is yours.
Thank you, thank you. Please allow me to first start in Dutch. Dames en heren, het is natuurlijk een beetje raar dat we in Nederland voor een publiekslezing dat we de Engelse taal gebruiken. En dat is zeker niet vanzelfsprekend en eigenlijk ook wel een beetje vreemd. Als je probeert om het publiek te bereiken, dat je dan toch het Engels kiest om dat te moeten doen. Maar ik hoop dat het inmiddels duidelijk is geworden. We hebben ook mensen van buiten Nederland die de Nederlandse taal niet machtig zijn, niet begrijpen. En nou, daar zijn we natuurlijk zo gastvrij met te doen. En de andere context is, en daar kom ik op, is dat deze publiekslezing niet uit de lucht komt vallen. Die zit in een context van een workshop waarmee wij deze week, eind vorige week zijn begonnen en deze week mee verder gaan. Dus daar kom ik zo nog wel even op terug. Dus ik ga zo over in het Engels. Dat betekent niet dat als u vragen heeft straks, en misschien wel onderweg, die u graag wilt stellen, en u vindt het lastig om dat in Engels te doen, schroom niet, stel ze gewoon in Nederlands. Dat is helemaal geen probleem. Dus dat even vooraf gezegd. Dus dan ga ik nu in het Engels verder, het spijt me. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity given to me to present this lecture, which is a public lecture. It is in the context of a workshop. I will get to that. And I'm glad to hear that there are significant numbers of online listeners and viewers as well. So questions will come from that angle as well, and you will probably mediate them. That's very good. So I've got here a Slido poll. What it actually is, it's just if you scan the QR code, you will get onto a website. And you will asked to fill out some questions and to give your opinion. And I would like to do that at the start, because what I would like to see is how this audience here in this space, but also online, how we compare to some of the more, let's say, general audience that we know of. So I want you to just basically feel how informed we are all together. So the presentation is entitled Animal Testing, the Dutch Transition. As said, it's on the Dutch Transition Program, part of it. But I take the opportunity to just paint a picture of what animal research, what science, and especially biomedical life sciences is all about, and what you may expect or perhaps not get delivered from it. So a little bit of my background, because I think it's justified that you know where I come from, so that at least you know what I'm saying. You know to put it in a certain context. So, and this is a long list, but I've just taken the highlights, and as you see from my grey hair, I'm not the youngest anymore, so the list is getting longer and longer. So I've tried to keep it as short as possible and to only highlight the things that actually relate to the topic that I'm talking about today. And that is that I did my BSc and Masters in Wageningen a long time ago, and animal experiments were already part of my master's degree. Oh, there are some people still coming. Please come in. Join us. Hi, no, that's okay. The more the merrier. Great, welcome. I just made an introduction in Dutch, because I think Dutch audience, you're Dutch, right? Yeah, okay. Dutch audience deserves to be addressed in Dutch, but we have international guests, so that's why the lecture is in English. So I hope that's not a problem. And I was just explaining a bit about myself, so you know at least the context where I come from, and you know that whatever I say is in that context, because this is my history. So I did my animal experiments during my master's already. That was my first experience with doing them myself. Then I did my PhD with the first professor of laboratory animal science in the Netherlands, which was Professor van Zutphen, in Utrecht. And also during my PhD, I used animals for scientific purposes, so in research. After 2 postdocs in Oxford and in Rotterdam at the Erasmus University, where I also used animals, I actually became the head of research of the and preclinical research actually of the Department of Pulmonary Medicine. And that was the first time where I really experienced why we do it. And that was because we didn't just do the research for the research, we did the research because there were some issues there. We had the pulmonary problems, so we had obstructive pulmonary diseases in patients that we obviously want to do something for. So here this was my first real experience where I was responsible for both the more basic type of work, which we did in cell cultures and also in animals, and then translated that to human patients, and we took that, whatever we found in human patients, back to the lab. So this was my first, as I said, experience with looking at the entire track that we pretend to do all times when we do biomedical research. Then I was recruited by the LUMC to become the head of the animal facility there, and that was going back to my roots of laboratory animal science. So that's where I left, more or less, this active contribution to biomedical research and more focused on research, my own work on looking at animal welfare and how we improve animal welfare in the context of animals that are being used in that experimental context. And I did a job, and then they said, well, why don't you become professor? So they appointed me as professor here as well, which I still am, and I still hold that position and contribute to the education and training at the IMC, and also have some projects that we collaborate with from my new place, where I've been now for 3 years in London at the Francis Crick Institute, which is a major research institute in the life sciences in the UK. And why I put that last bit, and you mentioned it already, my membership of the Dutch National Committee. This is a committee that is that actually was established in 2014 because of new legislation that we got in the Netherlands, and we needed to actually have a national committee, and I became member of that, which is now which was 5 years first term, and now I'm in my second term of 5 years. And the role of that committee is exactly what it is. It is actually advising the government and the minister and stakeholders on the protection of animals. So you have a bit of my background and where I come from, what I've done, and also so that you can understand a bit what I say and put that into context, and also challenge me on it, obviously. As I said, this lecture is not just it's a standalone lecture. I've got 2 very nice colleagues in the back, Augusto and Simone, who took the initiative to organize a workshop or to plan a workshop on communicating science in a democratic society, which is a topic dear to my heart and obviously to many people's hearts. And we've a very nice group of organizers, and we are here now together with about 10 people here physically present, and then a number of people online participating. And we started last Thursday. We had an excellent day today, I think, and we will continue to have more days, and my lecture should be seen in that context, in how we in communication and what we think is important in communicating science in a democratic society. So now the poll, and my first question is, it doesn't bother me if animals are used in scientific research. appreciate it's a negative question. So if you've got a smartphone, you can actually scan the code and you can get to the website and then moves a bit, doesn't it, still? It's interesting. So 29 votes up to now. So that's, well, I hope the majority of in this room. And then I hope some people online are also, because you can do it online as well. It doesn't matter whether you're here or not. So please. 35 at the moment, 36. Still moving a bit. Well, definitely the majorities disagree. And since it's a negative question, it doesn't bother me, it does bother people, whether animals are being used in scientific research. So that's over half in this situation in our case here. Now, I compare that to this, and this is a Mori poll, an Ipsos Mori poll in 2018. Granted, this one was, this is a poll that is done every 2 years in the UK. So this is not the Netherlands. There is not such a thing in the Netherlands, actually, such a poll. There is a European poll done every so often, but that one hasn't been done recently. So I think it's fair that I take the most recent one from Ipsos and also show you some data from previous years. And if you look here, we are quite similar, actually, to the public at large, at least the UK society. So that's quite encouraging, actually. We are not biased in that respect. That's great. So we have the different opinions here around in this room and also online. Then I do not trust the regulatory system around the use of animals in scientific research. Well, we are at almost the same number of respondents that we have in the previous. So most of people disagree, which means basically are very trustworthy of that the regulatory system that we use is that you can trust that system. There's still a few people that don't know, and neither agree nor disagree is also a certain percentage. When you look at that, then you actually see that it's almost 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 if you look at the population. So actually we're very trustworthy in this case. It's amazing. Very trustworthy of the government and that we put the right regulations in place. I don't know whether that's good or bad, actually, to be fair, because there's a lot to say about the legislation. Anyway, and the last one, before you actually knew anything, are you aware of the Dutch transition program? I say aware. I don't say whether you know it, but are you aware of it? Were you aware of it before you actually read anything related to this public lecture? I should have added that probably. Okay, so there is 60%. Obviously, the Ipsos Mori poll doesn't have any result for this one because it's my question. Right, okay, so that's a good number, but there are still a lot of people who, in this audience, or half of it at least, who comes here to be informed about it and to know more about it, which is great, and that's, I hope I can deliver on that as well during this lecture. Good. So this is the website of that transition program. If you go to that website, then this is what you see. When you read at the bottom what what the major question is research into medicines, food safety and risks of substances. How could this be improved, preferably without the use of laboratory animals? And this in itself, this question has a lot in it, right? Because when we say research, what do we mean with the research in itself? And I hope to address a little bit on that one. How could this be improved? Does it mean it's not right at the moment, or not good enough, or are we doing things in the wrong way? Of what's going on here, right? That is, it's a question that implicitly says that it's not all right what we are doing, and preferably is because of what we see, public opinion as well. There is considerable public anxiety about the use of animals for research purposes. Never mind what we do with animals in other areas, but the use of animals for research purposes is definitely an issue with the public. And that translates into politics, obviously, as well. So, what about research? Now, there is this wonderful research center. I would love to work there. It's a beautiful site. It's in Portugal, and it's the Champalimaud Foundation, and it's called the Champalimaud Center for the Unknown. I don't know of any research center in the biomedical sciences, in the life sciences, that is called Center of the Unknown. But it is exactly what it is. Why do we do research? Because we are searching for the unknown. And searching for the unknown means that there is no roadmap. Right? We have to find our way. And that is what research is all about. Research is search for the unknown. It's trial and error. Also the last one. It's trial and error. And it's making advances and it's getting setbacks. And it's infused with uncertainty. If you pick up any article, science article, and you read about the research results and the analysis of the results, there is always in it, it should be in it, that there is a level of uncertainty about these data. Why is that? Because the data is acquired because we are only looking at a subsection. We are selecting our individuals that we study, whether it be animals, whether it be cells, whether it be the population. We always have a sample of it. We look at it in a defined situation, not as we walk around, not as we live normally. We look at it in a very specific experimental case situation. So this whole system gives us data that we can use, but there is some uncertainty, level of uncertainty that we need to accept because it may not 100% translate to what real life is all about. And this uncertainty is what scientists always find and always report in their science reporting, but what not always is reflected when we see it in publications to the public. And this is what it looks like. There are many different roads and setbacks, as I said, to get to this goal. And this paper came out 2 weeks ago, and it's great. It says that the tangled history of mRNA vaccine development. Now, the mRNA vaccines, we all know them, right? Some of us may have gotten one, or two, or three, right? And we all say, oh, these were developed in 1 year. Lo and behold, here you see the history of mRNA vaccines. On the left-hand side, you see there in the horizontal line, you see 1960. This was the discovery of RNA. In 1965, that was actually the time when people started, and that's in the second column, the lipid-based delivery systems. So here are two sciences working together. There is the molecular science, and there is the biochemists and the physicists, who actually see that we can use lipid droplets to package something and to transport it from outside to the cell. And that's what mRNA vaccines are all about. It's mRNA packaged into something to deliver it to the cells. So that all the way goes back to 1965. And it wasn't a straight line as it looks like here. It was lined like this. And there were a lot of expectations over the past few months that this would get the Nobel Prize. Well, lo and behold, it didn't. Yet. And why is that? Probably, and I'm not sitting on the Nobel Prize Committee, so I don't know. But what I do know of the Nobel Prize Committee is that they look for the key moments. They look for the key moments that made a key change to research. And here, when you look at all what happened here, because the third one is actually mRNA with those lipids for vaccines. And this difficult road includes many scientists all over the world collaborating together and not just working independently, coming to some sort of similar idea, and then you get that result. It's a lot of people with a lot of setbacks and a lot of advances in the meantime. So that is what research is all about. So if we say that the vaccine was developed in 1 year, not really. There was a whole history of it going back to 1965. And that means that, and in that whole path, or these paths, animal experiments were conducted. Not just cells were looked into, but also in animals' experiments, because we are dealing with the immune system. And the immune system is very difficult to mimic in vitro, yet, in cell systems, yet. We're working on it, but it is not easy. So what is, in my opinion, the art of science? First of all, the art of science is really formulating the right research question. We as society, we've got some issues, we've got some problems. We had COVID pandemic coming up. We had a major infectious disease coming up. We had a virus that was really very effective in infecting a lot of people around the world. This was a problem. So we ask the science to come up with an answer. But then the scientist needs to pose the right question to the right model. And whether that be a computer model, or a cell model, or an animal model, in the end, we have to translate that all to the human being. But as we sit here, we're all different. So I may find one for one subpopulation, but that may not work for another as good. It may trigger something else in someone. And that's what research is all about. And that's what I said, the uncertainty, right? We do something that may work for a particular subset of people, may not work as well for another. And that's the uncertainty that we are dealing with in Optima Forma. So now back down to the animals. Why then are we using animals? And the reason, here are 3 reasons for that. And mostly mentioned. Mostly commonly you find those as justification for using animals. The top one is the various animal-free alternatives currently available. This is important in the context of our transition program, currently available. Do not come close to the complexity of the human bodily system. That is the case. In a lot of things we can mimic in cell cultures. You probably have heard of organoids. Perhaps you've heard of stem cells that we develop into more specialized cells. All these technologies really are very useful and helpful. But when we really have to look at how organ systems work together, it's much more difficult. And then we have to rely on more complex systems. So the second one, advances on alternative methods have not progressed enough to be able to replace animal research, is basically a mirror copy of the top one, right? If we talk about the transition that we need to have more non-animal alternatives available to us. And again, I will get to that. And the last one, we can do things with animals that we cannot do with humans. That is obviously very much at the forefront of some of the discussions, because there are factions in society who say that is not right. We shouldn't be doing to animals what we don't want to do with humans. And that is not about convincing, that is just where you stand as a person and what your moral, ethical convictions are. So, but these are at least the most commonly heard reasoning justification for using animals. Now, here you see how that translates when you hear the scientists talk about it. And this is a recent paper that was published, and actually you see here the COVID-19 highlights the model dilemma in biomedical research. So here the researchers themselves say, I've got a dilemma here. And even worse, even more, scientists will struggle to identify suitable animal models. So here is, in a science paper, they actually admit that it's not so straightforward. Not at all. Because different models are being used. Animal models are being used for different different research questions. But we also have organ systems that we can use, or here are the chips, the more cultures methods, like here we have got those as well. So there are different methods. Now, which method to choose, or which combination of methods to choose for which question? And that is a struggle. Scientists don't find that easy. And with the National Committee, we got a request from the Minister to advise and to give an initial advice on what has happened in the whole COVID pandemic and where the money has gone, into what type of research globally. So we've given initial advice, and we are looking now more deeper what has happened in that time. And yes, some of the responses that happened is very traditional, immediately going to animal research. But there were also others who didn't, and actually looked at more other alternatives that are available. So, as I said, the struggle is in there and really tells you what's going on. Now, this is, if we talk about numbers, again, then how many animals are used for the SARS-CoV-2 research? And this is only since April last year. So this is when the pandemic happened, right? This is not in that whole from 1965 till now. This is from April last year. As you can see there, April 2020 to June 2021. And this is only Germany. This is a paper that was published from German groups who have actually looked at it. And this is not all the animals that have been used. These are all the experiments that have been licensed by the authorities. So potentially, in that period, about 60,000, what does it say, 61,000, it says somewhere, animal experiments have actually been announced to be done in that period. And most of them are mice, but also hamsters, rats, guinea pigs, ferrets, non-human primates, and pigs. So this is Germany alone, 60,000. In the Netherlands, when we look at what the numbers that we use in general for animal experiments, you see that over the years 2015 to 2019, that hovers around 450,000, 500,000 animal experiments a year. And this has triggered much of the discussions in Parliament, in public, and then obviously has resulted in some activities at the governmental level. I've put the 2015-2019 in a different color because we changed legislation in 2014, and that also changed a bit in the systematics how we calculate. But as you can see, there's not much change, and that is worrying to people. They say, if you take it seriously, if you really take it seriously that we are using animals, and you really want to get rid of them in a way, or at least reduce it, then why don't these numbers change? Now, there are a lot of reasons why it doesn't change. I won't get into that. But this was the major trigger, actually, for the then minister in 2016, Martijn van Dam, who actually said to the National Committee, listen, I've had enough of it, and I want to see that the Netherlands should be world leader in innovation without use of lab animals in 2025. Now, in the public opinion, and especially internationally, this was translated as the Netherlands wants to stop animal experimentation by 2025, which was not exactly what he asked for. But that's how the message was framed. And he asked the National Committee exactly this. I asked to prioritize, so we had to drop all our work and focus on this. And to prioritize the preparation of the phase-out timetable over other current requests for opinions and send me your detailed plan no later than October 2016. So he asked this in April, right? So that was May, June, July, August. My summer was gone by that time. September, October. We delivered, not in October, we delivered in December. And that looked like this. No, that didn't look like this. I will show you what it looked like. What I want to say here, actually what he suggested, what he said was, I'm fed up. I need a change. And that change is just not happening. So we need to actually make a change as if it is a transition. We really need to push this. And what are the key elements of a transition? The key elements of a transition is usually because something doesn't happen organically. We really need to push for a transition. Where do we know other transitions? Sorry? Climate change, energy transition. Yeah, I will get to that. Exactly. So what we are talking about is something that we need to encourage. That's the non-animal approaches. There is something that we need to discourage, animal approaches, and that takes time. And whether that is 2025 or 2026 or 2050, God knows. As long as there is progress. So, as you rightly said, yes, this is a transition not different from other transitions, which means that it's global. Science is global. It's not just the Netherlands. We're not just spending money here on research, right? It's an international business. It's global. The stakes are extremely high. That's at an individual scientist level, but also at just the level of the money that's put in and needs to deliver. We need to deliver to improve health, not only just human, also health of animals. And we need to also provide sufficient evidence to improve the environment. There are limited resources, always. There's not indefinite money. And there are many, many stakeholders. And that's true for the energy transition, and you know how difficult that is. Gas prices are going up as we speak, and that creates havoc all over the world. So if we think about that, and we think about what the science world is all about, then the science world is not really different from any other business. Right? We have collaborations, but we also have stiff competitions. We have people that are proud of what they're doing, and there are people who are more modest about what they are doing. We have people that are idealists, but also opportunists. And we also have people that are more conservative and other that are more progressive. So that we've got all these factions in the scientific world globally that are not different from any powers that are, for example, for or against energy transition, or wants to push for it or take more risks than another. It's all the same in the science business, good or bad. And we need to understand that. It's not some elitist group that is just one harmonious family who just drives this all forward. Not at all. So we had this advice. Unfortunately, as an advisory body to the government, if they ask us a question and they put some phrasing in there, we need to put that on the cover. We can't just rephrase the question, right? So we had to phrase the question, we had to put on it on opportunities for the phasing out of animal procedures, because that was in the question. And that's been very unfortunate and not a very good message out. not in the least to the scientists in the Netherlands. They felt left out. They felt as if they were bullied, and rightly so. So what was this all about? And if we think about research, I've been talking about research as research. But if you really look what we are talking about, research has different types of research. We've got the fundamental basic research, which is basically understanding what life is all about, to the cellular, molecular level and up. Then we have got translational research. As I said, when I worked in Rotterdam, we looked at the preclinical phase in the cells and in the mice and mice, we use mostly mice, and then looked, okay, how can we translate whatever we see to humans, and how can we bring that back when we got patient material and bring that back to the animals? So that's the translational research. And then there is education and training. We use animals for training people, especially, for example, at the veterinary faculty. How can you have someone who's really needs to be a doctor for horses not train on horses? They need to be trained. So education and training, that we use animals for that purpose, is not strange. So you need to look at it from at a different angle. Fortunately, there are a lot of non-animal alternatives to teach initial phases of working with animals, like you do with patients. You don't immediately start cutting up a patient, right? You go to something else first. And then there is a big part which is called the legally required testing. If we want to be safe as an environment, as a community, we need to test substances, right? And a lot of that testing, by law, is required to be done on animals. There's a lot to do about it. It's a very international environment, but we have given advice on all these 4 domains of research. And it's that nuanced. There's not just one blanket approach. And that gets lost in public translation, unfortunately. So there are here and there more opportunities than in other, and some areas are slower than others. And what we are trying to do now is 5 years since, because 2016, we had that advice, that now we are in 2021, we had a meeting last week, that we actually have decided we have to revisit this. Where are we now? And let's revisit this advice, see where we need to fine-tune it, where to make it more contemporary, make it up to date, and then give another opinion on it. So that's going on. So let's go back to this TPI now, what it really is, the transition program. Because in 2018, so that's 2 years since that advice, the government said we need to have a governmental program. And that governmental program is called TPI, Transitie Proefdiervrije Innovatie. And translated, it is Transition Program Animal-Free Innovations. Is that this program started in 2018, ran till 2020, because of COVID, ran a bit longer. And now we are starting a new process. We're starting a new phase of the program. It's run by a program manager at the Ministry of Agriculture, and it has a smaller team. But what is interesting is actually what they pretend to want to do. Is actually they have the questions, what can we do better without the use of laboratory animals? How can we accelerate the process? As you saw in the transition, you need to accelerate processes, and you need to push, you need to put some pressure on it. So this is how can we accelerate the process? How can we deepen animal-free innovations in practice? Embed in regulation what is already possible without animal studies. So that is whatever is validated as non-animal alternatives for regulatory testing, then we need to change the law, right? But that's not just in the Netherlands. We need to change the law in Europe. We need to change the law throughout the world. Because an industry is not just producing a product for the Netherlands. It's not just producing a product for Europe. Very often they want to sell it worldwide. So then they need to comply with all that legislation, and they do just whatever the one who asks the most, go for that one, and then make sure that they cover all the others at the same time. So that is needs an international approach and is not so easily solved. And then we, obviously, there is how do we broaden that network? How do we make it international? Because this is, again, it's not just a Dutch thing. And yes, originally, everyone thought that the Dutch had gone mad. They probably still think we have gone mad. But we are, we don't, well, although I'm in the UK very often, and they think that I'm mad anyway, so that doesn't make any flaming difference, really. It is not just the government. What has happened in the meantime over the years is actually that some major organizations responsible for research in the Netherlands have actually joined the authorities in a steering group at the ministry. So that is the, as you can see, the National Institute for Public Health, RIVM. That is the Nederlandse Federatie van Universitaire Medische Centra, so the Federation of University Academic Medical Centers, the Federation of Universities, the Royal Academy of Sciences. A colleague mocked me today when I said Royal Academies of Societies. She said, why does it have to be royal? Well, being in the Netherlands and being in the UK, they are royal, usually, so I can't say anything about it. We've got, what is important here is that the ones who actually provide the funds, so the funders are involved, which is SONNEW in the Netherlands and the SGF, the Samenwerking Gezondheidsfondsen, so those patient organizations and others that are involved as well as Proefdiervrij, which is one of our animal, animal advocacy groups. And then there are some research institutes like TNO, the Dutch sector Health Holland, which is a portal to the Dutch life sciences. And there is a national committee that we are involved in. And this is not an exhaustive list, but these are the main participants in this consortium. So it's not just the government who's pushing for this, and it's not just politics pushing for it. It's definitely of interest to a lot of these stakeholders. Just two examples of what has been done in the past 2 years, since, well, 3 years, since 2018. And the left is the Hopperton, which is an interesting concept. And this network explores the requirements, guidelines, facilities, and conditions that may help researchers switch to animal-free innovations. Basically what it is what I said before, is that research is complex. There are many ways of doing things. You need to have the right question, you need to have the right model. And all models have limitations. Basically what they put together here is they put some experts together from different areas and discuss proposals. Proposals that have been funded or proposals that are up for funding. And say, okay, is this the right approach? Is the question the right question? Can it be modified? And how can we do that such that we give non-animal technologies and innovations the best opportunity to being used instead of animals? Quite an interesting concept, and it has worked and delivered already on it in a few cases. And then here is the startup taking further, which is as safe alternatives. So that is also in the legally required testing atmosphere, where we actually say, okay, what is a good safe alternative to use? And that is has to do with validation, has to compare whether the results are equivalent or better. Sometimes they're better. So that helps a lot. These initiatives are ongoing. And here are two initiatives that are sort of, well, this one is ongoing as well. It's been a major funding by the MWO, so it's in the National Science Agenda, and that actually is the virtual human platform for safety assessment. And what they're building is and it's an in silico platform for new safety assessments by modeling basically the whole human body in silico. It's a major investment. It's a huge sum of money that is involved, and this requires a lot of different experts to be involved, and wish them luck. I mean, that money has just been allocated, so they've only just started. They started, I think, in August, September, so this is very new, and hopefully it will lead to a beautiful result. And then there are, and that is good. I mean, we need, all this can be done, and you can push, and you can put powers on, but you need money. As I said, there is limited resources. There is always limited resources. And what is not meant here, and that is the danger, it is not meant to take money away from existing research and put it somewhere else. What it needs to be is add-on. It needs to be extra money. It can't just be that we take it away from something and then put it, because that doesn't really help the situation at all. So that is going on in another part. But if you go to the website, you will find more initiatives, and I've just taken these as examples. Now, you can do all that, and that's great, but who's going to tell me whether we make progress? Now, the only way of measuring whether you've made progress is that you need to have a measuring tool. Right? So a few people have been very enthusiastic, among which that gentleman has been very enthusiastic to work on a tool to actually see if we can measure advances. And I'm just showing this video. It's 2 minutes. It is subtitled, as you can see. It is in Dutch, but it is for the English-speaking people. It's subtitled. So let me start that video.
De wetenschap kan nog niet zonder dierproeven. Maar afhankelijk van de onderzoeksvraag zijn er wel steeds meer alternatieven. Proefdiervrije innovatie is een speerpunt dat door onderzoekers van kennisinstellingen, bedrijven en overheden wordt omarmd. De ontwikkeling en toepassing van proefdiervrije methoden vragen echter de nodige commitment en resources. De keuze voor het beste model voor de beste wetenschap is niet alleen de verantwoordelijkheid van individuele onderzoekers, maar van alle betrokkenen. De BATI, de Beyond Animal Testing Index, is een benchmark-tool die onder andere in kaart brengt wat kennisinstellingen doen op het gebied van proefdiervrije innovaties, zowel binnen hun eigen organisaties als ten opzichte van elkaar. Die transparantie geeft hun een krachtig instrument om van elkaar te leren en om zo de wetenschap naar een nog hoger niveau te brengen. De BATI verzamelt die informatie hoofdzakelijk uit documentatie van de organisatie zelf, zoals beleidsdocumenten, jaarverslagen en de website. Deze informatie wordt geanalyseerd en aangevuld met informatie uit interviews en vragenlijsten. Zo ontstaat een helder beeld van de activiteiten en initiatieven die een organisatie onderneemt om de ontwikkeling en toepassing van proefdiervrije en andere innovaties mogelijk te maken. Dit helpt onderzoekers om het beste model te kiezen voor hun specifieke onderzoeksvraag en om te benoemen wat zij nodig hebben om een volgende stap te kunnen maken. Bovendien krijgen veelbelovende innovaties zo de zichtbaarheid die zij verdienen en komen zij ook beter in beeld bij subsidieverstrekkers. Na de pilotfase met 3 Nederlandse UMC's en universiteiten kunnen nu ook andere kennisinstellingen zich aanmelden voor de BATI. Want transparantie en inzicht in elkaars performance zijn belangrijke pijlers voor collectief leren en better science. BATI. Working on a world beyond animal testing.
What it doesn't say in this video is that there is one driver here in Leiden who's the project leader, so that's Judith van Luik. And as you see that they've finished the pilot, and now we are ready to roll it out. The only thing is we need funding. And that funding is not there yet. So here you see how important funding is. And again, it is not money that has to be scraped from somewhere else. It needs to be additional to what is there, because otherwise we are defying the objective.
De wetenschap kan nog niet zonder dierproeven. Maar afhankelijk van de onderzoeksvraag zijn...
Right. So what have I tried to convey to you? What have I tried to picture? I've tried to picture an awful lot. I've not just here explained to you a little bit about this whole transition program and how it came about. I've also tried to paint a picture of how science works and how science is not very different from any other industry when you really look at it. We expect a lot from it. And that's why in the communication, in the science communication, and also how we are now discussing it in these few days, in this workshop, it is very important that we manage expectations properly. And that should come from our communications. Because what happens if we don't do that, then the outcome definitely not lives up to what has been communicated, and then there is disappointment. And that is where we're very often sitting. There is disappointment sometimes. When you read that cancer will be cured in 10 years, I mean, if after 10 years we still have hospitals full of people dying of cancer, then obviously we haven't delivered on that one. But it was a wrong promise to start off with, because there is so much uncertainty, and there is so much that we don't know. So our communication, we should do better in trying to explain to you what we can deliver on and what is a level of uncertainty that we have to just admit to. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is that I hope that I've conveyed to you that it's never a straight line. It's complex. There's not a roadmap. It's setbacks, it's disappointments, it's successes. The problem is you always hear the successes. The successes are shared in science publications and in just information to the public. Universities always put on their website how great they are. They never write about the disappointments. But we should share the disappointments with the public as well, because that helps us to get a balanced information across to you. And in that way, we don't have that the reality goes one way and the expectations go the other way. So that's what we are talking about in this workshop on communicating science in a democratic society. And basically what it is building and nurturing relationships, truthful relationships with each other. Dare to share. We need to dare to share with the public what it really is about, right? And show what we are doing. Have an open dialogue and be engaging, because we want to hear back, right? It's not a one-way traffic. It shouldn't be. So that's what we are trying to do these days. It's a challenging road, but it's great to do, and I'm still very engaged with it and enthusiastic about it. So I want to close with this, and this was a couple of weeks ago. Was a who reads the Volkskrant? Yeah, we're old. That's why these people don't read any newspapers. Such a pity. No, you see how things go miserably, well, no, I wouldn't say wrong, but they don't reach the audience. So this is our BPRC, our primate center in the Netherlands. We've got a primate center in the Netherlands, for those who don't know. It's one of the few in the world. It's a extremely well-run facility that is under a lot of public scrutiny. And because of the COVID pandemic, and especially in the vaccine development, but also looking at what the disease does, or what the virus does to the body, they did a lot of experiments on their animals, and they're not pretty. These animals suffer from COVID. And these animals die at the end of that, because we want to study what happens to their organs, and we want to study what happens to their brains. So that is traumatic. That is not nice. It is also traumatic to the people who work with them. So this is a beautiful story on 8 pages, I think, with photographs, naming people, names in there, explaining and talking about the history of 2 of those non-human primates, 2 of those macaques, from the start of the experiment, or actually from when they were taken from the colony and then were infected, and everything was done to them till the day that they are actually killed. So the response that they got, and it's obviously because they got 2 readers, so obviously they didn't get a lot of response. The response was, in general, positive, because it shared emotions, it shared what actually had happened, and also the reason why. So it was quite addressing, it was ticking a lot of boxes that actually did. There were also negative responses. But the overall was positive, which actually tells me that yes, sharing your doubts, sharing the fact that you don't know everything, and just share what actually happens does help and does have a good effect. So I took that as a good example, and I would like to close with this one and leave it at that. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jan-Bas, for this very... ik doe het even in het Nederlands. Pardon.
Goed.
Voor deze hele open inkijk in jouw werk. Ons ook weer even met de voetjes op de grond gezet. Hè, als het gaat over wat onze verwachtingen zijn. En dat daar ook echt wel nog wel eens aan getwijfeld mag worden. Ik denk dat er heel veel vragen zijn. We hebben tijd voor een aantal vragen. Even huishoudelijk. Wij zijn eigenlijk voor het eerst zijn we weer met elkaar bijeen in het echi, zoals ze dat in het Utrechts zeggen. Er is ook een livestream thuis. Als iemand een vraag stelt, dan horen de mensen thuis die de livestream volgen dat niet. Ik kom graag naar jullie toe en dan hou ik de microfoon op gepaste afstand. Als je dat niet wil, doe dan even met je hand zo. Gewoon heel eenvoudig, met je hand even op je schouder. Dan weet ik van, ik heb wat extra afstand nodig en dan kom ik niet bij je in de buurt. Dan herhaal ik de vraag gewoon voor de mensen thuis. Also, I give a quick translation for the international guest. We do a round of questions now. And because we have online viewers as well, if you ask a question, the people watching at home don't hear the question. So what I can do, I can approach you with my microphone so you can ask the question. If you don't want that, please put your hand on your arm. Then I won't come to you, but rephrase the question so that the audience can hear it.
Yep.
Ready?
I'm ready.
Oké, wat ook al gezegd is, vragen mogen ook in het Nederlands gesteld worden. En als er vragen zijn, dan hoor ik die graag. Ondertussen, ik kan op mijn telefoon kijken, dan ben ik niet aan het Facebooken of aan het WhatsAppen. WhatsAppen ben ik trouwens wel aan het doen. Ik ben niet aan het Instagrammen, WhatsAppen ben ik wel aan het doen. Ik krijg namelijk vragen van mijn alleraardigste collega. De vragen uit de chat van de videostream, die krijg ik via WhatsApp binnen. En gelukkig werkt dat allemaal weer na gisteravond. Any questions, vragen hier in de zaal? Ja.
Mag gewoon in het Nederlands, hè? Toch? Ja. Allereerst hartstikke bedankt voor deze interessante praatje. Wat zijn, denk ik, volgens u de velden die de low-hanging fruit zijn, zeg maar? Daar die modellen de meeste kans bieden om uiteindelijk toegepast te gaan worden? In regulatie en in wetgeving, zijn er velden die daar de meeste kans toe bieden of zijn we nog niet zo ver?
So the question is, for those who haven't heard the question is, what is low-hanging fruit when we talk about non-animal technologies, innovations that should be used or could be used, so that's in regulatory testing is what you're referring to, but also in other areas. I think really it is not so much that non-animal innovations, technologies are not being used. Especially in basic research, we see that a lot of it is readily implemented. Some of the hindrances are have to do with funding. So having a core facility, for example, and as an institute, having a core facility where you work with stem cells requires quite an investment. And in order to make that facility available to the wide range of researchers that are in an institute, you very often need additional funding. So that is not always there. But I think that, and again, I mean, there are, as I said, in the science world, there are people who are conservative, there are opportunists, there are front runners. So that mix is there. So you have some people who just say, no, I stick with my animal study, and And I just wait. I just want to see how fast that goes and whether it really delivers on what I need to know. So there is a dynamics going on, and that's more for the basic research. When it comes to the regulatory, I remember, and that's also one reason why I think we need to revisit our policy advice, is that in the 2016 policy advice, we were extremely confident in saying in that advice that we could make big steps when it comes to the regulatory testing. Based on information that we had at that time, that proves to be a bit too ambitious in the end. And the reason is that, and we discussed it actually today with a few people, what are the barriers there? So the animal model in the context of regulatory testing is seen as the gold standard. Now, we know that it's not a gold standard in all cases, but still, we're doing it. Granted, people are not dying left, right, and center when we actually consider a product safe, right? So they are doing quite a good job in preventing people dying when we introduce something new. So although they are not really a gold standard, they at least provide a level of safety that is not too bad. So you need a lot of evidence to actually say that a particular non-animal alternative covers that. And the other thing is then, and that's an ethical moral situation that is to do with politics, but it is also to do with the public at large, who is willing to accept some level of uncertainty. And I don't want to say extra risk or less risk, because that has to be proven, but at least accept a little bit more uncertainty. Is that the politician? He knows that if there is one baby who dies, right, without any clear evidence that it's, then he's got a problem. So there are multiple things that here are at stake, and that needs to be proven. What we thought then, and that is also the case, there are several non-animal alternatives on the shelf that have been validated, where even the European organization, Euro-ACVAM, which is a specific European branch of the European Commission, that is validating non-animal alternatives. And they actually have validated non-animal alternatives that are not taking to that next step, that they're actually being used to the extent that it saves significant numbers of animals. So it's an interplay. It's an interplay of what we know. It's an interplay of how validated are these things. What does the public accept as a reasonable risk to take? And what is the politician prepared to do in that whole context? There's a lot of players in there. So I'm actually quite curious, because we are going to revisit, as I said, our policy advice, and this will be a significant chunk to see how we're going to deal with that. So I don't want to run too far ahead of the result, because I don't know what we find when we do our investigations. But so that's a long answer on your question, but that's how difficult it proves to be.
Thank you. And that connects to an answer we got from not an answer, a question. We got from Jeroen van Meeuwen. Hartstikke mooi dat je ook meekijkt vanuit huis. Die vraagt zich af, wat zijn de belangrijkste redenen die het gebruik van proefdieren in Nederland dat het niet verder daalt? Die heb je zo net, denk ik, in een lange antwoord aangegeven.
Nee, dat is wel een andere vraag.
Dat is een andere vraag? Dan stellen we deze vraag alsnog. Of op deze manier. Wat zijn de belangrijkste redenen dat het gebruik van proefdieren in Nederland niet verder daalt? And if you just...
To be fair, I don't have an answer, actually.
Okay.
And so the question is, why is in the Netherlands we don't see that the number of animal experiments conducted per year and reported to the authorities is decreasing over time? And as I said, I don't have an answer to that, really. Let's just forget for a minute. Let's just paint an ideal world for a minute. So say that every single animal that is being used is for the right reasons, which means that all these numbers are for the right reasons. If that were the case, if we would see less animals being used, then you could actually say that in that case, that we have less scientific output, right? If every animal sits there for a good reason, as soon as we start decreasing them, there is less research activity. That's what you're probably going to see in the figures of 2020. I didn't show you the 2020 figures yet, and I couldn't because the Dutch authorities are not that fast in producing their annual reports. So we're still waiting for the official numbers in 2020. I know from the UK, where we actually have to submit them in January, the latest, and then the authorities, the Home Office, comes out with their numbers in June, July. So we know in the UK that countrywide, the numbers have decreased in 2020. And that is because there was a lot less science being done. Right? We saw a lot of COVID work being done, but that was a big slack in researchers sitting at home because they couldn't go to their labs, etc., etc. So there was a reduction in science output in 2020, and yes, there was a reduction in animals being used. So we don't live in an ideal world, right? And of those 450,000 on average that we use in the Netherlands, let's assume that some of them could have been avoided because we could have implemented non-animal alternatives. Probably. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, the dynamics in research, right? The Dutch scientist, the biomedical life scientist in the Netherlands, is the quality of science that comes out of the Netherlands is extremely high. And that's not because I'm Dutch, and I'm trying to be chauvinistic here. If you really look at the output that the Dutch scientist has, and you with the money that is invested, right? So if we compare that to the money that is invested, then we are extremely high producers of research. So we are extremely productive. And that means that, and that is sometimes what people say, is that if you compare the number of animals that were used, let's say, well, it is almost 50 years ago, because if you take the 1978 figures, we reported 1.6 million animals being used, but that was, again, different statistics, so it's very difficult to compare one-to-one. Then people say, well, with less animals, we actually produce per animal many more data. So that is a profit, right?
I have...
not an easy answer to Mr. Van Leeuwen's question. No.
Jeroen van Meeuwen.
Jeroen van Meeuwen, okay.
I have another question coming from Esther van der Kamp, which really ties into what we are talking and discussing now. What percentage of the requests to apply animal testing in research is denied? That's the first question. And are there examples of when animal rights outweigh the research interests? Two different questions?
Well, no, actually, I think if I interpret it correctly, is what she's asking is the harm-benefit analysis. So that is what we need to do. So we've got since the new legislation in 2014, we've got a project license situation in the Netherlands. That means that a researcher needs to apply to the government for a license to actually do the animal experiment. And that project license application is quite extensive. Can be a program of 5 years where you describe what you're going to do over a program of 5 years, and it has to be justified. There is an ethical review on that. And that ethical review on that is what we call a harm-benefit analysis. So what the researcher has to do in that application is actually has to say, okay, what is the suffering that I'm actually going to impose on those animals. So what is the level of suffering? And you have to report, or you have to prospectively, so when you write up that thing, you have to actually say, what is the maximum suffering that I expect that even one animal can undergo? And that's what I have to put in there as the maximum level. And then what this committee has to do, there is an official committee with the government. Actually, it's in the Netherlands legally it's a zelfstandig bestuursorgaan. There's no translation in English as far as I know. But what it legally means is they are a very independent, high-level body sitting with the government, and they have to issue these licenses based on a harm-benefit analysis. So it basically means the harm that I do to the animal is that outweighed by the benefit of the experiment. Now, with all I've said today, you can imagine how difficult that is. If I've got an application, right, that is, let's say 5,000 animals over 5 years, 10,000 animals over 5 years, right? And I say that their suffering is going to be maximum moderate. We've got 3 levels: mild, moderate, severe. So let's say it's moderate. How can I really say, okay, 10,000 mice with maximum moderate discomfort, how much benefit do I have to gain from that research? So that's the harm-benefit analysis of some. What Esther is asking is actually saying, is there other examples where the committee has actually found that there is not good justification for this to go on? I know of a few, but it's very few. Now, you might argue, is that committee doing its job? And the argument against is saying, well, yes, it is doing a good job, but what happens is that in the preparatory phase, by preparing these applications, they only submit the ones that are most likely to be successful. So they are not submitting ones that are... Now, I don't know whether that's true. I know that the bodies that are involved in writing these, which is the scientists in collaboration with what we called at the institutional level animal welfare bodies, instanties voor dier en welzijn, that they have quite some expertise there to make sure that whatever is being submitted is of good quality. So that is in place. Because otherwise you end up with discussing all sorts of things with the central committee. You don't want to discuss with central committees in this country. So, well, not in the UK, you don't want to discuss it with central committees either. But anyway, so you want to do your good job. And that is also a reason why you find only a limited numbers of rejections. I know that there are people who doubt that, but that's what it is.
Okay. I'm looking at the organizers of the workshop, and I'm looking at the clock, and I think we have time for one
pressing question.
With a short answer.
Burning.
Please?
I don't have short answers.
Okay.
I'm known
for
so. when I do. My colleagues always tell me. They start waving in the back or something. They do.
I think we have same kind of colleagues.
Good.
Probably.
Good. Well,
no.
Koen knows that for sure.
No, it was whispered to me that you have for the workshop members there is a small program.
Oh, there is a small program for
after this.
Oh.
After this lecture, and I know that the time is limited for that, and I know the guy who is guarding the museum. He's very strict.
Oh, he is.
I think.
Offer him a drink.
When you had organized this tomorrow, then you would have met a nice guy, I think. But that's between us. Dames en heren thuis, ik heb geen vragen meer gezien. Ik heb wel gehoord dat altijd gemaild kan worden. Naar,
Oh yes, if
met
anyone
vragen.
wants to follow this up with yes, my email address is not here on this thing. I can just give you my email address. That's probably easier. How do I do that easily? By typing in a text box. Oh, that's nice. I do my LUMC one because that's the shorter one. No, you can't read it. I will put it in white later on. So.
Ondertussen maak ik even gebruik van de gelegenheid om de mensen die thuis de livestream gekeken hebben, alvast hartelijk te danken dat jullie er ook waren. Jullie ook allemaal hier in de zaal. Our international guest, thank you very much for attending this lecture. En graag nog, het is gelukt, een heel groot applaus voor de spreker van vanavond. Wel thuis en tot ziens.